Welcome to the Codcast from Commonwealth Magazine. I'm Michael Jonas. It's been years in the making, but when a new education funding bill finally emerged on Beacon Hill, it came with a bang. The Student Opportunity Act calls for $1.4 billion in new state aid to school districts, plus another $100 million in other education spending. It seemed to be nearly everything advocates were calling for in terms of how generously it funds schools, especially those educating lots of low-income students. It also has something for those insisting that new funding come with new accountability to ensure the money is well spent and that districts are making progress closing achievement gaps. There's still a ways to go before a final bill becomes law, but we have a pretty good idea of what its broad contours will look like. That seems especially true because the bill was unveiled with the backing of both Senate President Karen Spilka and House Speaker Robert DeLeo, a notable display of bicameral unity right out of the gate. Helping us take stock of the big development are two people who have been deeply involved in Massachusetts education issues for years. Ed Lambert is Executive Director of the Massachusetts Business Alliance for Education. Welcome, Ed.
Great to be here with you, Michael.
And State Senator Sonia Chang-Diaz is the former co-chair of the legislature's Education Committee and one of the principal sponsors of the Promise Act, an education funding bill filed early this year that really seems to have set the terms for the deliberations that resulted in the bill now before the legislature. Sonia Chang-Diaz, thank you for being here as well.
Thanks, Michael.
So let me ask you, just give me your reaction to the bill.
2 thumbs up. That's
a pretty big vote of confidence.
And it's entirely earned. And look, there's no bill of this size or scope that has everything exactly the way any member of the legislature would want it. So that's, are there things around the edges, that I would tinker with? Of course. That's the nature of democratic governance. But in vast majority, this bill is, it hits all of the marks that I stood up in January, when I stood with our coalition of folks that have been pushing for the Promise Act this session and in years past, and everything that we said that we wanted and needed in a bill. It fully implements all 5 of the Foundation Budget Review Commission recommendations. And when I say fully, I mean fully, right? Particularly on that low-income increment.
Right, because there was some debate or range around what full implementation might mean on that.
That's right. And the benchmark that we were looking for there was that the rate that attaches to low-income students in the highest poverty districts needed to go all the way to the top of the range that the FBRC recommended.
The Foundation Budget Review
Thank
Commission.
You. Yes, thank you for checking my acronyms.
No alphabet soup.
No alphabet soup. But listener, be advised, FBRC is Foundation Budget Review Commission because it's a mouthful to keep saying.
Right.
So the commission said, look, we need to acknowledge that students in high-density poverty districts need more resources to get to parity in academic achievement compared to even a similarly low-income student, but who is attending school in a district that has a lot of resources and very few poor students. And it said, so at the top, in the highest poverty districts, you need to go 100% extra for those low-income students, and this bill does that. So check on that account, right? We also said this bill, we constructed the Promise Act on these principles, and I'm using these same principles to evaluate any bill, right? So we also said it needs to provide for an accurate counting of who is actually poor, right? How many low-income students do we have in our schools, which seems non-controversial, but we haven't been doing that very well for the last few years. We said that the bill needs to be sort of proportional in the phase-in process so that nobody's getting front-loaded or back-loaded to the end of the 7-year phase-in. And we said that it needs to be a bill that restores a predictable true partnership between the state and localities when it comes to the work of public education. And the thing that's really been sort of eroding that in recent years is our chronic underfunding of the charter mitigation money that the state promised to localities 9 years ago now. And the bill does that. So check.
So a happy camper
Yes.
overall.
Yeah.
And Ed, give us your kind of top line reaction to the bill.
Well, I certainly, I think, can speak for our members and for other folks who wanted to ensure that the bill was not just about funding, that we're really pleased with the outcome and want to credit Senator Chang-Diaz for her leadership, not only co-chairing the FBRC, but her continued advocacy since then. And I think that
That's
I really do think that this product brings across the finish line many of the very important
It's not at
goals.
the finish line
Oh,
yet.
I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. It's not over till it's over. But certainly, just as the senator just said, this focus.
It's the beginning of the end, not the end of the beginning, or something like that, right?
This focus on low-income ELL students, the changing of the deciles in a way that really recognizes the concentration of poverty, particularly in gateway cities, the counting of students, which I know the senator has been very focused on, and the language in that. We think it is very true to the principles of the FBRC in that regard, and very important and very well received, that part of it, at least, by our members. We also, as an organization dating back to 1993, have also been focused on, I'm going to use the word accountability, small a accountability, in that no one was suggesting that it's time to add new testing or things like that, but just to try to make sure that there was some accountability within districts in terms of how money gets spent. I know this is important to legislators on all sides of the aisle. That you want to not only fix the distribution formula, we want to make sure we get this right in terms of closing these persistent achievement gaps. And the language that's in this bill is something that we certainly celebrate. A lot of it is very reflective of the kinds of things that we've been advocating for over the last several months. The requirement that plans be put together, that there be some specificity about how money is being spent within foundation budget categories at the school level, and that there be specific targets set for closing achievement gaps, which we think is important as well. That if there's going to be this new investment, there's got to be a renewed focus on making sure we get this done. And so doing that at the local level, doing it at the macro level, the state level, we think is very important. There are also some other great provisions in this bill. One of them is at least the beginning of a more robust data collection and reporting on college and career readiness, which obviously you would understand the business community is very plugged into. And there's a requirement that the secretary gather that information, report on it regularly, et cetera. We do hope to be able to continue to work with legislators to build on that as this goes through the process, and to see whether or not there might be an opportunity to get some very specific programming in on college and career readiness. But we certainly applaud that and the innovation funding that's there as well. So there are a lot of great things in the bill, many of the things that MBAE and other folks have advocated for, and we really appreciate the fact that we think the legislature, and in particular Chair Peisch and Chair Lewis and the Speaker and Senate President's Office did an awful lot of listening through this process, and we think this bill reflects that they took a lot of advice and information, not just from business leaders, but from others, and incorporated that into the bill in a very meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. I would also just add in, and I'm not abashed to say this, that there are components in the bill that, much that's in the bill mirrors what was in the Promise Act, but a lot of the important stuff in the bill was taken, from the advocacy of MBAE, and some of the things were taken from the governor's bill that were excellent ideas, and I'm thrilled to see them in there.
So he had called for, I think, $50 million innovation fund, and so that sort of seems to be one element that is in this bill. It's at a different, lower, I think, $10 million amount. But I don't know, is there other things from his bill that you're thinking of?
That's probably the most obvious one. And I've long said, and I know we've had conversations about this. He'll attest to it, that I'm all for whether we call it an R&D fund or an innovation fund or the 21st Century Education Fund, a fund that is about developing new strategies, new ideas, and also, importantly, and I've been on this soapbox for a while, doing a better job at identifying, disseminating, and replicating best practices, right? There's actually a ton of great work going on in districts across the state, whether it be at charter schools or at district schools, that we don't do enough at the state level to lift that work up, celebrate it, and help spread it. And that's one of the sort of usable functions of this fund, which I was really glad to see in there. But another example of something that was in the governor's bill that shows up in the committee bill from yesterday is, it's sort of buried in there in the weeds, but it's an adjustment to one of the categories that builds the whole foundation budget formula. It's the formula is just a sum of all the stuff we think we should buy to provide a quality education, right? You need a slice of a superintendent and a slice of a principal and teachers and paraprofessionals and school nurses and books, blah, blah, blah. So one of the things, the categories that's in there is guidance and psychological services, which everybody agrees we are, just woefully sort of under-resourced in that category relative to the need that that educators are seeing come in the doors these days in schools. And so increasing the amount that is projected in the formula for guidance and psych services, not just for low-income students, but for everybody.
So I'm gonna date you a little bit now, Ed, for listeners, and sort of point out that before Ed was the head of the Mass Business Alliance for Education, he's worn a number of hats. One of them, he was for many years the distinguished mayor of Fall River, and before that was a member of the legislature, a member of the House. And if I have it right, you were in the legislature and even on the Education Committee in 1993 when the Education Reform Act was passed. And so as people...
He's calling you old, Ed.
Yeah,
well, he and I
seems
are,
like yesterday.
I think that he and I are roughly contemporaries too. So I'm not dishing out anything I can't take. But as a lot of people know, that that bill is often said to have been sort of the result of, or to represent what people call a grand bargain, that it involved a huge infusion of new funding for schools, a lot of it directed to lower income communities, but that it came with the whole structure of the A word, you said, the accountability that we set in place. And that question has been sort of looming over, I think, the debate on a revamping of the bill after the Foundation Budget Review Commission and in the years since then. And so I know, Ed, it's been important to you and to the Mass Business Alliance that it have these provisions, including the one you referenced that will require districts to set out targets for achievement, for closing achievement gaps, and report regularly on that. But I just wonder, Sonia Chang-Diaz, how you felt. I remember at the time of the rollout of the Promise Act, the view that you had was that, I remember you sort of used the term that, this was owed money, that the formula had degraded so much that this was really an effort to kind of make districts whole that had been shortchanged. And you seemed, frankly, kind of wary of the idea of attaching strings, as people might say, to it with other measures on the sort of accountability side.
Yeah.
How are you feeling now about? How do you feel about the degree to which it does have some of those in there?
I feel like the way that this bill threads the needle is appropriate. And look, I've never been allergic to the word accountability. I think it's all about keeping our word, right, and balance, and staying anchored in the original intent, the original focus, mission, and balance of the '93 Reform Act. Hat tip to Ed here, right, in his original work. First and foremost, right, we have to stay anchored in the fact that the driving goal of the '93 Ed Reform Act was to close opportunity and achievement gaps, right? It was about closing those disparities. And we shaved down those disparities in the first 10 years or so, but we have not just stagnated. As I say, we have backslid, and we have among the worst gaps in the nation now. And we have to, the first step of solving a problem is you have to admit that it's there, right? And we have to admit that we have failed at that mission, despite excellent intent and good faith effort in the first 25 years. And so, keeping that focus on that needs to be our driving goal behind this new bill. And I appreciate that MBAE has reiterated, right, that the bill needs to keep as its focus, what are we doing to close those gaps? The question of balance, right, is in the '93 Act, and then again in the 2010 Act, right, which doesn't get talked about that much over this recent course. The Achievement Gap Act. Yeah, there were substantial accountability things, right, measures that were put into the bill originally in 1993, and then they were substantially increased in 2010, and over the course of that time
It allowed
period.
for state takeovers of schools and for entire districts.
Yes, thank you
example.
for summarizing. And that rapidly speeded up the pace of intervention that the state would take when schools were foundering. And this is what gave rise to the turnaround system, right, that we have now. But at the same time, right at that time, there was no grand bargain, right? There wasn't a trade. We didn't increase funding.
There was a little bit of federal money
There was
that came
federal
in,
money,
one-time money,
but it was
right?
temporary. It was basically sort of gap money, right? Because the bottom had fallen out of the economy, and so, but for that federal money, schools would have seen massive cuts. So it was essentially, schools did not experience any increase, any new resourcing in exchange. I'm going to give air quotes that your listeners can't see, right? In exchange for those increased accountability measures. So the experience of school districts, and more importantly, students, over the last 25 or 10 years, depending on where you start counting, is that we have not been keeping pace, right, with what it costs to educate students. So the funding has been cut for year over year. And then if you consider the fact that we never got the numbers right from the beginning, again, despite great faith, efforts by Ed and others in '93,
Things changed, sure.
we did not appropriately size the formula in 1993 with respect to closing opportunity and achievement gaps. And so students have never been getting the resources that they actually needed to catch up, right, and to get to that equal starting line in life.
So it's kind of, we haven't really given the real test of whether,
Right.
with the adequate funding, you're saying we can see those
Right.
gaps close.
So I'm saying,
or narrow.
let's keep the transparency, the accountability, the data collection and assessment stuff that we have, but actually juice the system with the resources that we know are necessary to get the job done, and then get the job done.
Right.
I think an important lesson here, too, is that, we can't always wait 25 or 10 years
Amen.
to revisit some of this. MBAE is calling for a standing Foundation Budget Review Commission that can continue to assess where there might need to be changes and the like. We do think that these opportunities don't come around very often. So ideas, not unlike one of the governor's proposals to incentivize early college and career pathway programs in high schools, or some version of that,
Right.
is the kind of thing that we hope can increase in the conversation over the next several weeks. Earning credentials in high schools. The fight 25 years ago was on academic achievement. That's still important, closing these achievement gaps. A lot of employers across the state recognize that even for students who pass the MCAS and graduate from high school, they are not always very ready for college or career. So things that we can do to continue to bolster that we think are important. There's also a very astute provision in this bill that hasn't gotten a lot of attention relative to asking the State Department of Education and DOR to continue to take a look at some of the equity issues relative to the formula. And we think that that's an important component as well.
And by that you mean what share of the foundation budget is paid by districts versus the state in some ways, or is that part of it?
In part, but
Yeah.
we have a very complicated formula, and it attempts to try to get at everything. And as a former legislator, I also have a great appreciation for what you need to do to ensure that there's enough statewide support to move important legislation forward. But taking a look at some of the non-needs-based portions of the aid, we think is something that at least the legislature has put a marker in this bill to suggest that that's a conversation that should keep going between DESE, DOR, and legislative leaders. We think that's a very good part of the bill.
Mm-hmm. And your point about the college and career readiness stuff, I think, does kind of underline this point that there's a feeling we shouldn't just be sort of updating what was the sort of approach in '93 through funding or other things, but it's sort of taking stock of kind of the world as it is today and sort of what we understand today. I don't think there was the appreciation then of this issue we've seen of kids getting over the bar here with our accountability system, but really struggling in higher ed. Mm-hmm. That's and so then sort of trying to sort of reverse engineer and see what is it about the way we operate our high schools, that needs to really change. And a lot of them were kind of built on a structure going back 100 years. I mean, it was a time when only a tiny share of kids coming out of high schools were expected to go on to college and graduate. And so it's just such a different world that I think, your point out about taking a more expansive view of what we can do, and your point that, that this is kind of the moment to look at some of that stuff. As much as I know there's kind of some inclination to sort of keep focused on the main elements of this bill, and the more you start to introduce other parts to the conversation, the greater the chance of kind of getting bogged down in it. But I think your point is that you don't always have these opportunities.
We appreciate that. I don't think I'll be around for the next round either. So we want to try to get this, but to redesign our high schools, given the fact that we have thousands of kids on waiting lists to get into career tech ed programs, and they can't. The success that early college has shown for first-generation college students in terms of them persisting in college, these are proven practices, and then maybe we can do something to jumpstart and ignite that a little more. I think the reporting on these issues is terrific, but if we just report and it's not part of some larger system to incentivize it for high schools, we may be missing an opportunity. But you know what? That's in the grand scheme of things. Let me start to close on this by saying we're pleased with the bill. We think it's a very significant effort on the part of the state, and kudos to the legislators and leaders who helped make it happen.
Yeah,
I just want to say, while like I said, we're not. It's not done yet.
Right.
There are some significant phases we still have to get through, and I think it's really important that people, stay tuned, keep eyes on the prize. We need to get this bill all the way through both chambers of the legislature and the governor's desk. Let's not pat ourselves on the back yet. Totally. But when this bill is passed into law, it's sort of like I liken it to the feeling of winning an election, right? On election night, you're celebrating, and then you have this moment where you realize, oh gosh, tomorrow I'm going to have to work even harder, right? That's when the real work is going to start. That we're not going to have to wait, another 10 years to do the right things in education. There is a ton of work that is going to start having to happen and roll out across the state once this money starts to flow. And there are so many things that we need to get right. And there are so many ideas that I think are sort of primed and ready to go to bring to scale, right? That districts have been piloting, and that there are waiting lists for official or otherwise, right? I think about the city of Boston and the efforts that it's been going through in recent years, but not being able to really get there in expanding our early education offerings, right? And there's so many families that want into those seats, and there are not enough seats to go around. So there, and that is work that I expect will just blossom over the next few years once we can get this bill into law.
All right, I'm just going to ask you to take 2 seconds, quick political reaction on as we end, and that is that there's another big player. We've talked a lot about the work in the legislature, but Governor Baker is kind of watching from the sidelines, or has been. He's going to, at some point, get involved in this, and he also filed a bill, and it landed at a very different place than this bill has, or than the Promise Act did. And so I just wonder, how do you sort of think the governor kind of is going to reckon with all this? There's roughly about $1 billion difference between in current dollars the amount of new state aid that he proposed, 400 and some million versus 1.4 billion.
So appreciate you getting those numbers right.
So where does that leave the governor in this sort of complicated dance?
I think you should invite him on the show. I think only you can answer that question.
Look, I think all the parties in this process deserve some credit, and I think Governor Baker does as well. Even within the context of what was happening when his bill was offered, he has been, I think, committed to these issues. Sometimes people forget too that he was a member of the Weld administration at a time when the '93 Act came about. So he's very familiar with the balance and the need for reform as well. And I know they're looking at the bill, and I think at the end of the day, we will, as a Commonwealth, all of the entities and the administration and the legislature will move toward the same goal.
All right. Well, on that cheery note, we will call it a wrap. And I want to thank you both so much for coming in to talk, Senator Sonia Chang-Diaz, Ed Lambert.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Michael.
And this has been another installment of the Codcast from Commonwealth Magazine. I'm Michael Jonas. Thanks for listening.